Hi, Adam here from the Brisbane channel with the 39th weekly Greater Brisbane update of 2025. In this one, Olympics updates, new housing precinct details, a possible crocodile in the Logan River, and things you'll want to keep across from Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Moreton Bay and the Redlands. This video is sponsored by local businesses YB Painting Services and Excel Psychology, along with a special discount for viewers, but more on that later. I've cut the amount of stories down in the weekly update videos, but you can find more updates on both the Posts tab of this channel and on the Brisbane channel's Instagram account. We'll start with something relevant to all 5 Greater Brisbane LGAs as well as the rest of the state. The state government has put out a release saying that the number of victims of youth crime has dropped since they implemented their adult time, adult crime laws. They say that almost 3,000 youths were charged with over 14,000 offences, including car theft, home break-ins and robberies. They also say that the number of victims of crime has dropped by 10.8% relative to the population from January to September this year, compared with the same period last year. State police data indicates a 15.5% drop in people who have had a car stolen, a 21.2% drop in break-ins, and a 12.6% drop in robberies. Despite the disinformation broadcast in the lead up to the last election, crime had fallen in the last year of the former state government, including a 3.9% drop in car theft and an 8.5% reduction in break-ins. According to the Queensland Audit Office, youth criminals make up about 13% of all offenders in Queensland, and again, despite what many have been led to believe, this figure had barely moved over the decade leading up to the election. However, while the percentage of youth offenders didn't change, the number of repeat crimes committed by the same offenders did increase. So the proportion of offenders remained constant, but the number of crimes that group committed did increase. But this update should really just focus on those figures that have been announced this week, so I'll leave it there and save the more detailed look at the youth crime situation for the dedicated video a few months down the track. I did find a couple of interesting things when I was briefly looking into it this week though, and I'll share those along with my thoughts on the implications for the Crisafulli government in the My 2 Cents segment toward the end of the video. Let's jump to a handful of updates relating to the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Firstly, the first round of opportunities for businesses to bid for contracts to supply goods and services for the Games has been launched. These include provision of technology, temporary venues, market research, signage and event production. In all, 50 different expression of interest packages were open to businesses in this round. On the day of the launch of the procurement program at Queen's Wharf, Save Victoria Park organised a protest against the development of the park to build a 63,000-seat stadium along with the National Aquatic Centre. The day before that, the group had released a report which claimed the deadline for the stadium to be completed before the Olympics would be missed by 6 months. Save Victoria Park claims the report was based on the advice of experts in architecture, town planning, engineering and constructability, but none of them are actually named in the report. While the original outline in the Geek's 100-day report said that 68% of Victoria Park would be retained as green space, that didn't take into account the construction of the aquatic centre as well. Save Victoria Park is still raising funds for a legal challenge to Olympics infrastructure being built in the park and have raised well over $100,000 of their $200,000 target. But after the legislation brought in earlier this year that bypasses planning regulations for key Olympics infrastructure projects, ultimately removing any legal grounds on which the construction can be challenged, it will be interesting to see just what shape any legal challenge takes. Of course, we'll keep you updated here on the Brisbane channel. While we're talking Olympics, outside the 28 core sports featured in the Games, as host we can introduce a handful of extra sports. In the 2028 LA Games, those extra sports will be baseball and softball, cricket, flag football, lacrosse and squash. While Logan and Moreton Bay jostle to host baseball and softball before their inclusion is decided on, and a mixed bag of sports including netball, cricket, surf, lifesaving are all vying for a place in the lineup, another sport is looking to be a real contender. It's looking like rugby may be in with a good chance after Brisbane 2032 President Andrew Liveris expressed his attraction to the idea of its inclusion. Speaking at the procurement launch on Wednesday, he said, should they turn up with an application, they'll get great consideration. Liveris has said that the code hasn't yet decided on if they'll push for touch football or the full contact version in their bid. Over in Wollongabba, and procurement opened on Thursday for the Gabba Entertainment Precinct, including the 17,000-seat Brisbane Live Arena and up to 16,000 new homes. The vision for the precinct is for it to become an entertainment, residential and community hub, with ready access to multiple modes of public transport, including the Cross River Rail. We mentioned some amendments made to the plan in a recent update video, including the removal of the requirement for any affordable housing, as well as some green space areas. But let me give a little insight into what may have contributed to that decision. Before the amendments, they only had 3 development applications, and both comments from viewers here on the channel, as well as something I found out in an interview I conducted with a key figure in urban and suburban renewal, point to costs involved in building high-density housing already being restrictive. When you bring in a requirement of including affordable housing, that may lead to profit-motivated developers looking elsewhere. I'll give you my thoughts on the situation in the My 2 Cents segment. If you get anything out of these weekly update videos or any other content on the Brisbane channel, you can help the channel by giving this video a like. It does help. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything, and you can say thanks by buying me a coffee or two. And special thanks to those of you who have decided to contribute as monthly supporters on Buy Me a Coffee. You can also become a channel member to access extra content and advance access to videos. Thanks to these members for their continued support. Plans for a new 40-storey mixed-use tower have been submitted for South Brisbane, and I've decided to keep it in this update video because it's unique in a couple of ways. The application documents say that the proposed development provides for affordable and diverse housing outcomes through the integration of the build-to-rent model and flexible unit typology configuration. That flexible configuration is quite interesting. While the 35 residential levels will include 205 studio, 320 one-bedroom and 45 two-bedroom apartments, some will have doors between them that mean they could either serve as separate apartments, such as a studio and a one-bedroom unit, or they could unlock the door and become a larger apartment. This also opens up the possibility of 3-bedroom apartments being able to be rented. Definitely something a little different. However big or small your home is, one of this video's sponsors, YB Painting Services, can help make your home look its very best. I've seen their work, and their professionalism and meticulous attention to detail is impressive. With fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on all their work, you can be sure there'll be no unpleasant surprises. Claim your 10% discount by scanning this QR code or the link in the video description. Up in Moreton Bay, a site has been secured and planning is in progress for the Youth Foyer at Redcliffe. A youth foyer is housing for young people aged between 16 and 25 at risk of or experiencing homelessness that provides a supported living environment with wraparound services. The site was acquired earlier this year, and the architect Archifield has been appointed to design the building. The site is close to public transport, services, employment opportunities, and the local TAFE campus. In Ipswich, the city is becoming more flood resilient with continued work on its ageing drainage infrastructure. This week they announced that upgrades to East Ipswich's stormwater drainage has been completed. This included installing 245 metres of stormwater pipes in sizes up to 1500 millimetres, 4 times the size of the pipes they replaced. Mayor Teresa Harding says the old pipes would have taken about 4.5 hours to fill an Olympic swimming pool, while with the new ones it would take just 7 minutes. It's expected that this will significantly reduce the risk of flooding. East Ipswich was stage 1 of a 6-stage project. After the recent successes on the national sporting stage, with the Brisbane Broncos men's and women's teams winning their respective championship finals, and the Brisbane Lions winning their 2nd consecutive premiership, the Logan Thunder under-14 boys basketball team have joined the list, winning the national championships held in Western Australia this week after beating the North Adelaide Rockets. The Logan Thunder under-14 girls team also took out bronze in the same event. Also in Logan, there may be a crocodile in the Logan River. An avid fisherman and board member of the Australian Fishing Trade Association, Steve Morgan, was fishing for barramundi when his sonar picked up a 3-metre crocodile-shaped mass in the water. Mr. Morgan, a marine scientist, says that crocs and barramundi have similar distributions, so if the barras were this far south, it's possible that crocs could be too. There were reports of a crocodile sighting around North Stradbroke Island in 2023, but the last time a crocodile was found in the Logan River was in 1905. It was spotted floating dead in the river after apparently having been shot. Theories were that it was a crocodile that had escaped after being given as a gift to a couple of locals. If you're looking for support with anxiety, depression, stress, ADHD, or relationship challenges, the other sponsor of this video, Excel Psychology, may be what you're looking for. They're a warm, inclusive psychology practice based in Spring Hill, about 500 metres from Central Station. With a diverse team of clinical and registered psychologists, they'll help match you with the right psychologist for your needs, often with short wait times. They offer Medicare rebates with a mental health treatment plan and also support work cover and NDIS participants. I featured members of the Excel Psychology team in a recent video on handling stress, and you can check that out here. In the Redlands, Council has announced a crackdown on people jumping from jetties after a report this week of someone jumping from the Cuchimudlo Island Terminal jetty close to a ferry. The Bayside area has seen jumpers seriously injured by jumping into water while unaware of submerged hazards, and Mayor Joss Mitchell says that others have also been injured by jetty jumpers. Jetty jumping is an offence and can result in an infringement notice being issued. Now a couple of quick bites. In Moreton Bay, independent candidate Ellie Smith has been sworn in as councillor for Division 11 after a by-election held for replacement of Darren Grimwade after he stepped down from the position. Brisbane City will be installing 3 strands of colour-changing festoon lights above Caxton Street to bring a boost to the atmosphere of the area. They'll have the ability to light up in any team's colours, and with installation beginning this month, they're expected to be ready to go before the end of the year. Now it's time for me to give my 2 cents on a couple of issues we've covered in this video. I mentioned an audit into youth crime by the Queensland Audit Office. The report was tabled in June of last year, so it doesn't reflect anything of the current youth crime related policies, but it does highlight some important points that should be considered by the current state government. The audit pointed out that most young offenders only commit a small number of crimes and are diverted away from Queensland's youth justice system, and it's only a very small proportion who re-offend and commit serious offences. But in the 4 years to the 2022-23 financial year, there was a 64% increase in the number of serious repeat offenders. So what did the audit recommend could be done to combat this? Well, one thing they found was that there was a lack of consistency in how the responsible government department identified young offenders at the highest risk of reoffending and how the Queensland Police Service did. And they found that this increased the chance of high-risk offenders missing out on getting the case management or rehabilitation they need to address their offending behaviour. When sampling the files of serious offenders, 18% of the 50 files they analysed had no record of any rehabilitation programs being delivered to stop them reoffending. They also found that young offenders in detention often did not receive the rehabilitation or education they needed because the centres were often locked down due to staff shortages, safety incidents, or other factors, with Cleveland Youth Detention Centre having the highest staff shortages. So looking into what we've seen in the first 10 months or so of the new state government, there's been a massive focus on recruiting more police for enforcement, but I'm yet to see an announcement of increased recruitment of staff for detention centres so that they can ensure education and rehabilitation services are delivered to those at risk of reoffending. Of course, we saw in a recent update that the state government has started funding a range of rehabilitation programs to help stop youth from reoffending after being released from custody. What the audit found was that while there were good evidence-based programs being implemented, many offenders were not being risk assessed to ensure that they were receiving appropriate case management and rehabilitation on release. Not only that, but many of the programs were not independently assessed to see if they were effective in reaching their goals. So if the current state government really wants to get the most benefit from any rehabilitation programs they fund, they need to both make sure they're being delivered to the right youth and that they also undergo independent assessment to make sure they're actually effective. Enough on that. The other thing I mentioned I'd bring up is affordable housing, and stipulating that a proportion of a given development should be allocated to affordable housing. Let me preface this by saying this is not an area of my expertise. I'm simply sharing the way I see things based on the little I've seen and heard on the subject. I try to make my opinions as well-founded as possible, but I expect there will be people who can find massive holes in my views, and that's great because this is all about raising ideas and generating a conversation that we can all learn from. So if you have something to help better understand the situation, please do share it in the comments. While I think it's a noble idea for developers to include affordable housing in their developments, I believe we should think about who it's appropriate to expect to provide affordable housing. I've heard from multiple sources, including viewers of this channel, that construction costs for high-density housing has become prohibitively expensive. As we saw with the low level of interest from developers in the Gabba Precinct, including these requirements may result in developers looking elsewhere to build. The thing is, developers are business people. The reason they're doing what they're doing is to make money. They're profit-driven, and personally, I can't blame them for not wanting to lower their profits that are becoming harder to make in a shifting economy. The government, on the other hand, doesn't exist for the purpose of making money. It's meant to be for the good of the people. All people, rich or poor, and I would argue they should be especially concerned about the needs of those in our society who are more vulnerable. People on low incomes, people with health conditions, physical or mental, the elderly, that kind of thing. Some of our most basic needs and rights are safety and shelter, and I would expect that a major concern of any government is to ensure that people are not denied those things. I don't want to get into things like inequity and how policies favour big corporations compared to Aussie battlers, but I'm sure if the will was there, all levels of government would be able to find ways to fund significant public housing projects, and the costs would probably be offset to some extent by the knock-on effects of the increased housing affordability. People's health would be better without the financial and mental stress, which would mean money saved in the public health system. They'd have more disposable income, so that would also help the economy overall, as household spending would rise. Perhaps a naive view of how things work, but I invite people who know what they're talking about to share their thoughts. I'm sure some people will bring up migration policies, but that's something I have even less knowledge about. On the surface, more people means more demand, so if we could reduce migration, it may seem that that would help. And with the recent marches we've seen, it seems many Australians agree with this. But for one, we're going to need people to build any new housing. And as far as I know, there's a labour shortage at the moment, and that's what's contributing to increased construction costs and delays. It's a big topic, and the more we dig into it, the more the discussion moves away from things that are specific to the Greater Brisbane area. So I guess I'll stop it there. Don't forget there will be more updates over the coming week on this channel's posts tab and on the Brisbane channel's Instagram. I've got some from Ipswich, Brisbane, Moreton Bay and Logan so far, and I'm sure more will pop up over time. YouTube thinks this is the best video for you to watch next, so maybe check it out. See ya.